Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for being here and for all your work. I know I've said it a lot, but sort of it came up earlier today, but your work after Sandy for Southern Queens and Rockaway was really, truly amazing. The people, to this day, regardless of sometimes concern, appreciate your efforts that you made during the most desperate times, so I appreciate those efforts and everything you do. I'm going to try and spare you some of the hyperbole, because we all have it bad, we all have it tough, we all have transportation problems. The question is are we looking at big ideas? You know, it's easy sometimes to make improvements here and fix this and fix that. I agree, we've done a good job in trying to improve the A train, we've increased the express bus service, but we need to look at big ideas, and you and I have talked about this before, but things like new rail lines and restoring the old rights of way. The Reinvention Commission sort of thought it was a good idea, and have you followed up on some of the Reinvention Commission's sort of recommendations and looked specifically for what I'm thinking is restoring some of these old right-of-ways?
We certainly have looked at those aspects of the Reinvention Commission that talked about additional resiliency as we do state of good repair projects. To a lesser degree, we've looked at the issue of expansion as a result of increased needs of capacity as ridership grows. But certainly the Rockaway Beach branch, which is the one that would serve the Rockaways better in terms of, you know, how you could use that right away. And there's competing interests, because some people want to turn it into a linear park, as you know. But we haven't done anything really concrete with respect to either allocating money to do a study or committing to do a study. But certainly that would be an example of a project that into a long-term expansion as the city continues to grow and the region continues to grow would be, because the right-of-way is still there right now.
And that's the point. Right? The most valuable asset you probably have is your right-of-way. What's costing us so much money on the Second Avenue is having to dig the tunnel, right? In something like this, utilizing it would be the most cost-effective way to increase access for people. And I want to just say, it's not just about families in Rockaway, who I'm concerned about, in Howard Beach and Southern Queens, but it would create intra-borough connectivity, allow people to access other parts of the borough, but also access from Manhattan residents to JFK Airport, which I think is important as we continue to grow. I just wanted to ask, the city is engaging in sort of an aggressive ferry plan. Has there been any talks about sort of coordinating payment systems and transfers to subways and buses? Yes,
but not first out of the box, and let me explain what that means. An expanded ferry system to promote a more flexible travel across the river, East River, from Brooklyn and Queens to Manhattan is something everybody's looked at. It's not our prime responsibility, it's the city's, it's not our core competency, and I don't think it should be our core competency. But where you literally and figuratively land those ferries on the Brooklyn side and on the Manhattan side or the Queens side, you need to put them close to places where there is parking availability and or other elements of public transportation. The challenge we have is all the way up and down the Brooklyn and Queens waterfront, when they were originally built out and originally used in the city, they were industrial. Much lower density, much lower traffic demand needs. As you turn them over to commercial use and residential use, that use changes. So we need to work closely with New York City DOT, and we do, with respect to how that development should occur, how we should share in the revenues from the zoning to be able to pay for the transportation needs, and how we would make sure that we co-locate transportation elements for ease of transfer. Once you get to that point, then you can address the issue of, is it a free transfer, is it a subsidized transfer, or is it not a subsidized transfer? But you have to do all that other stuff first before you get to that issue. And certainly we would like to create a system where, put the fare subsidy issue aside, and whether it's a free transfer, it's as seamless a transfer as possible. But it needs to follow that course of action. Look, the city, to their credit, is looking to create some sort of their own shuttle service. But for Rockaway, as an example, if you get off the ferry at Beach 108 Street to jump on the A train and go surf at Beach 67th Street, just makes sense. We're recreating the wheel by trying to sort of duplicate all these systems that are already in place. And we shouldn't duplicate. You're absolutely right. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Senator Kruger.
Thank you, Mr. Pendergast. So you have a very difficult job. We all know that, those of us who live in the MTA region, and we appreciate all the work all of your people do it every day. And yet we still have hard questions that don't get answered. So you answered several colleagues' questions about, there's more of a IOU deal than an actual money on the table for the 5-year capital plan to date, but you're not really holding up where we're going. So I understand that has to mean you're front-loading borrowing within your 5-year capital plan, because if you're not getting money from us, you must be having to borrow. So you must be in dialogue with the bond markets. You say you have great confidence that the state would never fail to deliver what the MTA needs. Do the bond markets believe that too?
That's his pay grade, and I say that not in a facetious way. Ask me questions about operations, the budget of the organization, and things like that. That's
I'm
mine.
happy to hear from him.
Bob has worked his entire career, either in the private sector or the public sector, dealing with bond finance.
Thank you. We have a financing bill that's been proposed by the governor and presented to the legislature. What the marketplace understands is the legislature and the governor's office will negotiate a solution that will be passed and reflected in legislation. Once in legislation, it then will be presented to the Capital Program Review Board as the funding solution to fill this gap. So what's happening right now is we're continuing to sell debt based upon prior authorizations for prior capital programs. We're continuing to fund or commit against projects with pay-as-you-go revenues that we've already set aside. So the marketplace is seeing us do things orderly and in continuing according to the process that's been established and done before. What they're waiting to see is what happens during this legislative session. So as we see how it evolves, as we see how it ends up, and as we see what is presented to the Capital Program Review Board and approved, then the bond market will know where the capital program for 15 to 19 is headed.
So you're working off the end of the obligations or borrowing from the last 5-year capital. Everybody's hoping we will get this deal done in some way that is concrete enough for you to go back to the bond market for new borrowing, and that whatever the financial plan passed on behalf of the MTA and approved by the board of the MTA is, that will be adequate to go back to the market? Am I understanding that right?
Yes, but again, there's two pieces. Remember, there's the borrowing that we are planning on doing. We have the funds set aside to pay debt service on that, and we have money. So again, we have put aside what we think is about $8.8 billion for this program through bonding and through pay-as-you-go and asset sales. But we can't sell those bonds until we have a capital program approved by the Capital Program Review Board. So again, the marketplace sees that we've done what we need to do and that we're ready and that we have funds that will carry us through for the next few years. They're waiting to see what will happen through this legislative session for that gap funding. And so when they see that and then they see the Capital Program Review Board's approval, they'll know that the full 26.1 is funded and we can proceed. So they take comfort and confidence in the fact that we have done what we needed to do to set the stage and that we're waiting for the process to be completed.
Thank you. So I woke up this morning and I read the Wall Street Journal, and it was a story about a plan to sell the building on Madison and 40th?
341, 345,
Thank you.
347 Madison.
So in previous discussions between myself, other electeds, and the MTA, your plan was to sell the building. I think at the time you talked about a sales range of about $450 million, although the market just keeps going up, it seems. A commitment to do infrastructure improvement where the buyer of the building would have to commit to, I think in the discussions around the East Midtown rezoning dialogue, it was up to $150 million in infrastructure improvements that you very much wanted to help with your Grand Central completion. And then when I woke up and read the story, it was going to be some kind of long-term underlying lease deal. It was not approved by your board yesterday. I'm just trying to get an understanding. What happened between you were going to sell the building, get the money for the Grand Central infrastructure, move along till it became a lease deal, and I don't really understand all the pieces of that.
Okay. Going back to the prior administration, the Bloomberg administration, there had been an ongoing dialogue with respect to what could we do with assets that we owned outright. Many of the assets that we utilize in the city, as you know, are part of a master lease with the city because we inherited the transportation system from the Board of Transportation, so we don't own those assets. But there are assets, especially on the MTA side, bridges and tunnels side, and commuter railroad side, where we own the asset outright. So there's been pressure across a great stakeholder front If, as a public entity, we're utilizing a public space or a space that could generate revenue, might it not be better for us to relocate to some other place and get the benefits of a transaction that would enable us to generate money to fund the capital program? So the discussion was along the lines of a disposition of real estate, whether it be an outright sale or a ground level lease. And there's financial advantages to doing either one. In some cases, an outright sale, you may get more money up front, but with a ground lease, you get a longer revenue stream over a longer period of time. And the subject of payment in lieu of taxes came up, and that was part of the discussion with the prior administration. And so in the transaction that we were bringing forward, and we expect to bring forward back to the board, it's a ground lease transfer of rights to Boston Properties for them to develop the asset in vertical way, 341, 45, and 47, go through the appropriate rezoning process to possibly upscale the FAR, and then payments in lieu of taxes they would make, because we're a government entity, don't have to pay taxes, are made to us to support the capital program. And that's the nature of it. But the discussion had always been along disposition of real estate assets, not an outright sale. It could have been a sale, it could have been a ground level lease, and I think that was part of the discussion over a very long period of time. It predates my coming back here. It goes back to the early 2000s that these discussions are going on as part of Midtown East rezoning.
So if you sold the building to a private entity and they did whatever they intend to do with the building, that property becomes a tax-paying entity. The MTA, as I understand the newspaper article, is arguing that if you lease the building to the exact same kind of entity, you go into some kind of pilot deal where the MTA receives the pilot payments, but the City of New York does not receive taxes.
That's correct.
Do you have the authority to collect pilots, and have you used that authority before?
Yes, we have, and at the Atlantic Terminal Center, that's exactly the situation that's done. That was a jointly developed property between the MTA and the city. We received 90% of the pilot payments. The city received 10% of the pilot payments. Effectively, it's also what's going on in the Hudson Yards. There, however, we're receiving the benefit of the construction cost for the number 7 extension. So we are receiving the benefit from those real estate tax payments or pilot payments. So it's not an uncommon issue for a government agency to do. But just to go back to what the chairman said earlier, the benefit for us to do a ground lease as opposed to an outright sale, with the ground rent, we have a 99-year lease, we're going to receive a revenue stream from the developer for the next 99 years. That can fund not just this capital program, that can help the next capital programs going forward in the future. There's also the difference that if the private developer is going to give us a lump sum payment, they're going out and borrowing that money. They're using their own equity capital and their own cost of borrowing, which is significantly more expensive than what it would cost us. So they're looking at a revenue stream that they're going to have to generate to fund equity returns for their own investors, as well as the debt for their own lenders. So they know what that stream is. If they give us the same stream, we, with a lower borrowing cost, can get more proceeds from it. So there is a benefit for us to enter into a 99-year ground lease. If we do continue to own it, there is no tax owed to the city on that. But we don't want the developer off the hook, so the developer is then asked to make a payment exactly in the same amount as they would pay for their taxes. But that benefit comes to the MTA, that the proposal is it would be used for the capital program and future capital programs.
So your position is you've done the math on that the pilot you would receive over 99 years is exactly what the City of New York will not receive in taxes.
What was proposed was that the pilot payment would be based on what the taxes otherwise would be, yes.
And so what's the number of the pilot for 99 years?
I can't remember the sum total for a certain, depending on what the FAR upzoning, it was $1.1 billion to $1.3 billion in total. And the pilot,
over 99 years.
Over 99 years. That's present value over 99 years. And that the pilots were the majority of that. Okay, so the pilots were somewhere between 700 and 900
So the
million.
MTA loses, the MTA wins, but the City of New York loses.
I don't necessarily know if I'd interpret it that way, because where we're at right now is a lot of development is occurring in New York City. On Phase 1 of 2nd Avenue, neither the city nor we received the benefit of the additional upticks in zoning, okay? So we paid for access to construct a subway. If damages were done to buildings, we paid to make them whole. And then after the transportation improvement goes in, they take the benefit of that transportation improvement in terms of the increased property valuation, and the owner gets something, and the city gets something, and we get nothing out of it, and yet the investment that was made was in a large share in part why the increased value of the property was there. Even in the agreement with the city for the $2.5 billion, as was laid out, $1.9 billion straight, I think, cash, and $600 million in value added. In the proposal that the city's proposal for the Brooklyn-Queens streetcar, a $2.5 billion cost, is they're saying a large portion of that cost would be paid by value capture of increased real estate. It's something transportation entities, whether they be a city or a transportation authority, are looking at. Because one of the strongest benefiters of a healthy, robust transportation system is the business economy and the developer world in a particular area, whether it be commercial, retail, or whatever. And so we're trying to capture that and fund that money for transportation improvements. We made investments to relocate to 2 Broadway to be able to have higher density location to create the opening of the space of 341, 45, 47. And it was part of a long dialogue, Senator, with the city administration, the prior city administration.
So I know I'm at 0, but just 2 points, and perhaps we'll have a chance to come back to further questions. One, I actually don't read your statute as allowing you to do pilots for a non-transportation related joint activity. This is simply a private real estate deal at the end of it. You're not staying in the building. You're not doing joint transportation work with the entity you want to lease to instead of sell to. And for the record, if the precedent is set that any non-tax-paying entity can choose to, instead of sell their property, keep it on lease arrangements so that they can privately collect the tax value and keep those properties off tax rolls forever, that's a very dangerous precedent, in my opinion, not just in New York City or for the MTA, but on a statewide basis where we hear from localities all the time what the impact is when all their properties are taken off the tax rolls. So I would like to continue that.
Sure, we'll continue the dialogue. In the 2 cases we talked about, it was part of an agreement with the city at Atlantic Terminal. And we understand that ultimately in this process, anything to do with upticking in zoning value have to go through a New York City controlled process.
And will this deal have to go through the city and be approved by it?
Pardon me?
Would this deal have to be approved by the city
In
of New
terms
York?
of the FRA, it has to go through
Yes.
that process,
Yes.
absolutely.
No, the pilot.
Yeah.
The
Well,
pilot in lieu of taxes. Does that require City of New York approval?
And I do not believe that that is required. However, we have to be pragmatic. There's negotiations that go on, and we will be looking to see, to work with the city in the disposition of this asset, and we know that they have an interest in future revenues coming from this. So again, we understand that we have to work together with the city as partners.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Assemblyman Otis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a few Metro North questions to pose to you. One is Penn Station access, which you mentioned in your statement. I know it's contingent upon the East Side access project, so could we talk about what sort of the projected timetables would be, and in a sense, when East Side access is completed, how long would it take to be able to access Penn Station for Metro North trains?
Sure. You're exactly right. We cannot provide access for the New Haven line and the users of the New Haven line in New York State into Penn Station until we have East Side access. East Side access's operational date is 2023, so we have time between now and then to be able to start work to provide 4 additional stations in the Bronx, make the power track, signals and communications improvements we need to make on both the Metro North territory, but the Amtrak territory through which it has to cross over the Hellgate Bridge and into Penn Station. So the idea is that day 1 of East Side access, I think it's 20 slots, 20 trains start going into East Side access, lower level of Grand Central. Over time it grows to 24 slots per hour, okay? And that frees up slots for the New Haven service. But we're thinking initially only 8 of those slots, 2 trains per hour in the rush hour coming into Penn Station. So the idea is to do the infrastructure improvements, do the fleet issues So that, in effect, once we start sending trains over to the lower level of Grand Central from Long Island, when we're freeing up those slots, we bring Metro North trains into Penn Station.
So there's no real time lag once you have east side
Not
access?
at this point, because we still have some time between now and when east side access will be completed.
So my other question relates to the New Haven line and capacity, and this is a long-standing issue of concern and frustration to riders. There are just not enough seats for the passengers on a regular basis on many trains. And I know you've been trying to tackle this, but what has happened so far? What are the plans in the next year to try and improve that situation and get seats for riders to be able to travel on?
Number one, the New Haven line is the most heavily traveled line in the country, not only for the services and for the people in Connecticut, but in New York as well. And just due to the ridership growth in the Metro North territory over time, that's been challenging for us. What exacerbated the problem were the reliability problems of 2 years ago, where the running times we weren't keeping up with critical track maintenance. I've been here and talked about that in the past. Joe Giletti's got that issue in order. We're restoring the track maintenance standards that need to be, increasing the operating speeds, reducing the running time. But what happened during that period of time when we were having extended running times and weren't performing to schedule, people were jumping trains. So if they normally, I'm going to pick a time frame that's just made up. You know, if you're operating out of a certain station at 7:15, but you weren't guaranteed to get into Grand Central when you expected, you take the earlier train. So that moved people around. And because the scheduling of trains is done so fine to try to limit the number of standees up to a certain point, we had to make changes to that. So, but we still have to make changes in terms of increased fleet and additional trains or longer trains to accommodate that. We're better than we were 2 years ago, we're better than we were a year ago, but we're still not where we need to be. So it's a constant effort to try to do that.
So what are the limitations on increasing the fleet in terms of just availability of cars, number one? Number two, are there length of train limitations in that corridor that limit your ability to put more seats in the system?
In a general way, we have some trains that are at maximum length right now on both the Long Island Railroad and Metro North. It's like, I think it's 12 cars. I don't think we have any 14-car trains. But there are a lot of trains on the shoulders of the peak, so early in the peak and after the peak, where we're running 8s and 10s. So as the spillover occurs to those, we can add 2 cars. You can add more cars than what you have platform length for, but that presents problems because you either have to make 2 stops at the station to get people on or force them to walk through cars. So we try not to do that. So there is some ability for capacity increase by increasing the length of trains where they're not already at their maximum length, and watching ridership patterns. And the ridership patterns do vary depending upon availability of seats, but also people's riding patterns. And the other thing that we're seeing changing is the traditional 9 to 5 Monday through Friday commute is changing significantly across the region. There are people that are starting earlier, leaving later. There are people who do not commute all 5 days of the week. They commute 3 days of the week, they travel another, and they telecommute the other day. So we're trying to fine-tune the schedule. But where the problem is the most acute in the commuter rail is the New Haven line right now.
Is there an opportunity to add more trains at strategic points, or is
It's
that
possible depending upon fleet size. But once again, when you run a piece of equipment, you run it into the terminal and you try to get it back for a second cycle. So there's limitations as to how fast you can get that back and put that back in service. So in answer to your question, there's some room for growth, but we're close to the limits. That's the challenge. When I say 6.2 million people, that's just the subway. We're seeing tremendous ridership increases on Long Island and Metro North, and not the bus system. The bus system is holding, and the bus system was falling. The bus system is basically holding right now. It's not dropping as fast as it was.
Well, I'll continue to ask just for whatever help
Sure.
you can for the New Haven line, because it is a long-standing problem, and understanding the limitations with Connecticut, but we have people that are paying good fares to ride in. They should have a seat, and they should have that level of convenience. And it is really not true on the Hudson and the Harlem lines, this capacity problems. Really on the New Haven line.
It's certainly not true in the Hudson. We're experiencing on a few trains on the Harlem line, but by far more pronounced on the New Haven line.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Senator Martins.
2022, I'm sorry, on East Side Access. I apologize. End of 2022.
Good morning,
Senator.
Chairman. How are you?
Very good.
You know, I've heard a number of times you referencing projects related to this capital plan that I don't believe have been either authorized by the CPRB or are included in your 2015 to 2019 plan. Is it your position that you have the authority to advance projects that have not been authorized by the CPRB?
Absolutely not. We can't advance a project that hasn't been authorized by the CPRB.
All right. You know, when I did
Advance a project in the phase at which it's being advanced in. There's some projects that have been approved for advancement up to a certain point, but not past that point.
I understand.
So planning or environmental, but not construction.
But, you know, if we're talking about a third track on the main line of the Long Island Railroad between Floral Park and Hicksville, I don't believe that that project has been authorized in the past by the CPRB or is even referenced in your 2015 or 2019 capital plan. Is that right?
The construction is not, but in a prior plan, I believe the 2004 through 9 plan, the planning and environmental was authorized and funding approved for it, I think in the range of about $7 million.
I understand. But you did say in your testimony that you'd begin work on a third track. And so I just wanted to make it clear that there is nothing that has been approved in terms
clear.
of capital to build a third track. There is nothing that has been proposed formally to build the third track. Certainly, I haven't seen a plan and I haven't seen an amendment to your capital plan that would include a third track. Isn't that right?
That's correct. And what normally happens in this part in the process, I hate to use the word puts and takes, but I think people know, in this case, we have a revision to the plan, not the original plan. And so before we get to the point of submitting to the Capital Program Review Board, we need to make sure that the appropriate adds to that program and subtractions from that program are made as we submit it. Otherwise, it's more likely that it could be vetoed by one of the members. But in answer to your question, yes, but it's the intention moving forward when we do submit something to the Capital Program Review Board that the project for construction of the third track main line would be in that plan, subject to the CPRB's approval.
But it's not there yet.
Yes, that's
And you
correct.
understand that. You can't do it without their approval.
Understand that.
The New Haven line and, you know, the discussions we've had this morning with regard to access to Penn Station, I'm assuming that that comes at the expense of slots that are currently occupied by the Long Island Railroad. Isn't that right?
But those slots would be emptied and created as Long Island Railroad has those same trains using those same slots go over to Grand Central.
Well, look, we're going to have an expansion of service on the Long Island Railroad once East Side Access is complete. We have trains going to Grand Central, but we still have slots and people going to Penn Station, right?
Nowhere near, there is no way we would utilize that additional capacity fully by Long Island Railroad. This will be the largest increase in service that the MTA has ever seen in its entire time. And for the $10 billion investment for the 24 slots into Grand Central, there is no way we would have to backfill by need, by growth capacity, the 24 slots from Long Island into Penn Station. And what we're talking about in the New Haven line is 8 trains per hour, 8 trains of those 24. That's what we're talking about.
But in prior discussions, well, again, there is no approval and no plan
Yes.
and no capital plan that has been approved by the
That's correct.
CPRB to build track linking the New Haven line to Penn Station as of yet.
That's correct.
And in prior discussions that you and I have had and others from the Senate, from Long Island, you have made commitments that you would not displace trains from Long Island for the benefit of Metro North. Isn't that right?
Displaced trains from a standpoint of trains that are now utilizing slots. That wasn't the issue of backfilling trains that are now going to Grand Central.
But if there's capacity for Long Island Railroad trains that are currently being used and for passengers who are traveling to Penn Station, that those trains will continue to travel to Penn Station and will not be displaced if there is capacity. If people are riding those trains, they will not be closed or displaced for the benefit of Metro North.
It's a long discussion, sir, that may require something beyond this meeting. But the issue as to whether or not, if only 10% of the people remain going to Penn Station on a given train, do we take that slot and tie it up for those 10% versus other people coming in from other parts of the network that need to get to Penn Station? And it's also the issue of how many trains the Long Island Railroad system can handle in terms of what trains they feed to the 3 terminals they will have. actually two terminals, because you won't have a direct seat ride to Atlantic Terminal anymore. You won't be able to run enough trains. So we'll be dividing those direct seat rides between Penn Station and Grand Central. And the network east of Herald will not support filling all those slots with Long Island Railroad trains, backfilling them, and the 24 slots to Grand Central.
And we'll
Especially without third track. It's arguable you can do it with third track, but it certainly could not do it without third track. We have the modeling to be able to show that.